Hello and welcome to India's World. China has announced a $46 billion investment plan for Pakistan. The investment will focus largely on creating a China-Pakistan economic corridor from Gwadar in Pakistan to Kashgar in Xinjiang in China. The proposed Chinese investment is more than double the amount of foreign direct investment that Pakistan has received since 2008. It is also about 20% of Pakistan's GDP and considerably more than the total assistance from the United States, which since 2002 has been Pakistan's largest donor. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor will be a combination of transport and energy projects and will involve the development of a major deep-sea port. It will offer China its shortest access to Middle East and Africa and Europe. Besides giving a leg up to the Pakistani economy, the corridor also promises to open up the remote, landlocked Xinjiang province of China. To discuss the prospects of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor redefining Sino-Pakistani ties, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, one of India's most distinguished diplomats. He's been former foreign secretary and Indian ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France, and Russia. We have with us my old friend Ambassador T.C. Rangachari, another distinguished diplomat. He's been India's ambassador to France and Germany. He speaks Mandarin and has handled China in the Ministry of External Affairs. Currently, he's a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation in New Delhi. And we have with us Mr. Jayadeva Ranade. He's the president of the Center for China Analysis and Strategy in New Delhi. He's a member of the National Security Council Advisory Board, former additional secretary in India's External Intelligence Agency, RNAW, or Research and Analysis Wing. I welcome you gentlemen to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. Do you think by announcing this 46 billion investment plan, China is redefining its interests in Pakistan? That is, would you say that the relationship is no longer based on my enemy's enemy is my friend, or a sort of shared hostility towards India, but it's grounded or sought to be grounded in something much more positive, the strengthening of Pakistan's state, its capacity and its economy?
Well, a bit of both. Pakistan has always received huge assistance from China in the security domain, in very critical technologies, nuclear and missile. Whereas the economic partnership has been rather unimpressive. Trade levels have been low. Chinese investment has been very little. Now there is a major effort to invest big time in Pakistan. And this Pakistan-China economic corridor is something that has been in the air for some time, and Nawaz Sharif has been visiting China. They've been talking about it. But finally, China made this decision to unveil this huge project. Though, of course, this figure of $46 billion, if you spread it over 15 years, it is less impressive than it might look otherwise. They're not going to invest it in the next 2-3 years. And you never know in 15 years what may or may not happen. There may be a lot of slips between the cup and the lip before then. And there are other security issues that are involved. And finally, it's very important that this is not investment in the sense that China is giving assistance or donating funds. These are commercial projects which will be implemented on the ground on the basis of commercial viability. And that can produce a lot of problems down the road, because all these power plants and everything else that will come up, the tariff at which the electricity will be produced, like in the case of India, would be critical. And given Pakistan's state of the economy, it will be even more critical. And the Chinese banks and all are going to insist on, economic parameters will be very difficult for Pakistan to meet. So I'll keep my analysis of what it might mean open for the time being. But yes, it is a very major political commitment that China has made to Pakistan.
Ranga, these projects which have been announced, they include a port, an airport, a gas pipeline coming from Gwadar to Xinjiang. Many people say it's the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline, which will now go to China because of India's dilly-dallying on the line. And a 2,000-kilometer railway network. Now, this scale of investment, it's not aid, as he points out. It's investment, but it's also state building. It's building capacity of a state which in parts of the country had no infrastructure or frayed infrastructure. Or do you see this only as another attempt by China to enhance its development assistance to Pakistan?
Well, I think we need to look at it perhaps at 3 or 4 different levels. One is the larger global kind of picture of the role that China is proposing to play Clearly, China now having emerged as the second largest economy with a close to $4 trillion reserve, wants to assert itself in the global scene as a major player. And also, in some ways, I think we should give China the credit for trying to create a new agenda for development and connectivity in the neighborhood and beyond. And that is where the proposal that was made by Xi Jinping in 2013 and followed up now in the NPC by Li Keqiang and by Xi Jinping himself of one belt, one road comes in, because Nawaz Sharif, in his statement welcoming Xi Jinping in the Pakistani parliament, has talked in terms of how this China-Pakistan economic corridor will be a spur to this one belt proposal, which runs from Xi'an to Kazakhstan and on to Turkey, Iran, Russia, and into
the
Europe.
new Silk Route.
So that is one dimension. The second dimension is what it does for China's own interests. You mentioned the development of a port. I guess you're referring to Gwadar. Now, that is what would provide a linkage to the Middle Eastern energy supplies. And I think we should not be surprised that once the project actually gets started, there will also be a pipeline, an oil pipeline that would be added on to the
but let me take the question of China's interest to Mr. Ranade, as we're running short of time on this. So what are the major strategic interests of China? He's mentioned energy security being one of them. And we see that in the entire region, they're investing in coal in Afghanistan. They've set up a $20 billion fund for energy development. But what are the strategic interests of China in making these investments in Pakistan?
I think I would identify them, really speaking, as three. One is Gwadar port itself, which, if we look at the history, there was a lot of dithering by China despite Pakistani pressure. Till, firstly, Pakistan gave them sovereign guarantees over Gwadar, and then another almost 10 years before this present move. The second is the connectivity that they have developed through POK, Gilgit-Baltistan down, which gives them direct access to that area, and in one stroke, in fact, implicitly recognizes Pakistan's presence, or almost tries to legitimize Pakistan's presence in Kashmir, and the secession of the Shaksgam Valley, which was done illegally by Pakistan to China. That's also been, I think, now put out of the picture. And the third thing is Gwadar as a port, which is going to be a naval base, and their strategic lines of communication for which surveys have already been completed.
Okay. All right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the China-Pakistan economic corridor and how it redefines or seeks to redefine Sino-Pakistani ties. Ambassador Sibal, how is China's counter-terrorism strategy linked to the investments in Pakistan? How important is the concern about the Uyghur extremists of Xinjiang finding shelter in Pakistan's tribal areas, and the state, a weak state, not having the capacity to deal with its own insurgents? Forget about insurgents targeting its closest ally.
I mean, they don't need to invest in $46 billion to deal with this problem that they're facing in Xinjiang.
By strengthening the state.
But they're not going to be able to strengthen the state by pumping in this money. They're not going to run the state. They're not going to be able to deal with internal political problems, the state of democracy, the military-civil relationship, the corruption, the ethnic problems within Pakistan.
So the Uyghur issue is not a concern?
No, it may be a concern, but it's peripheral. You see, Pakistan, if it has the means, it would be inclined to satisfy China on this issue at the state level. But they have a huge problem. They can't deal with internal insurgencies. And part of the problem, they have promoted themselves. So if they have the capacity of not doing it, then certain conclusions can be drawn. Then I can't see the Chinese rewarding them for this. But if through injection of all these funds and greater stability, more economic development, Pakistan is able to fight the radicalization that is growing within the country, then it will help China also. But I don't think they need to give this kind of an incentive to Pakistani military and the Pakistan government to deal more forcefully with the Uyghur movement, Uyghur separatists who are getting training and are staging terrorist attacks with the backing of people in the border regions. I don't think the two are connected, really.
Ranga, do you agree with him? Or do you think that a state that develops as a proper state, which is a normal state, is better able to deal with the growth of Islamic terror and Islamic extremism? Or do you think it is wrong to have this economically deterministic view that, solve the economic problems and growth of terrorism will disappear? Do you need to look at the ideological roots of Islamic terror and address those issues rather than economic issues, which may be peripheral, as Ambassador Sibal has suggested?
No, again, let us disaggregate this into its components. First of all, insofar as the Xinjiang is concerned or the Uyghur militants are concerned, this is a major issue, major source of concern insofar as China is concerned. And I agree with Ambassador Sibal that if the Pakistani state was in a position to satisfy, they would definitely want to satisfy China that they are dealing with this issue effectively. Even now, whenever they catch these ETIM militants and others, they hand them over to the
Eastern
Chinese. So
Turkestan
that is one
movement.
issue. The second issue is that this link between poverty and terrorism, it's really not clear that this is a tenable link. We know, for example, 9/11, people who were involved in that did not come from poor countries. They didn't have a lack of funding, etc., and so on. So the connection between poverty, economic development, and that being a root cause of terrorism is something which is not an established fact. Okay. The third thing is that insofar as the problem of terrorism faced by China is concerned, and this is not simply limited to Xinjiang, that is a problem which has to be dealt with by the Chinese, dealing with their own ethnic minorities,
okay,
rather than dealing with the Pakistani state.
No, that's a point well made. Mr. Ranade, how big a challenge is the insecurity in Balochistan to this economic corridor, which passes through Balochistan or parts of it?
Well, it is a challenge, and the Chinese are quite concerned about the threats as well as the killings and abductions that have taken place of their workers. In fact, Chinese analysts still refer to the abduction of those 5 women during the Lal Masjid incident. But here, if I may just go, I tend to agree with Ambassador Sibal that it is the strategic consideration that has motivated China into undertaking or into approving this China-Pakistan economic corridor, because Chinese analysts are very closely following the radicalization of Pakistan society, and they're quite concerned about the various groups that are functioning there. What has happened now is, I think they are putting money there for strategic considerations, but they remain concerned about the growing tide of radicalism. On the other hand, as far as the Uyghurs are concerned, which you mentioned, they're able to control the situation. It's not that it's reached such alarming levels, but they are concerned. And since 2011, Chinese officials have started naming Pakistan as the source of turbulence in Xinjiang.
Okay. Well, Sibal, going back to Balochistan, because there is some dispute about the route of this this corridor. Only consensus seems to be that it will connect Gwadar with Kashgar. Now, there are reports in the Pakistani press that the route has been shifted and that it bypasses Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which has Taliban presence, and that it bypasses large parts of Balochistan because of instability there, and has moved eastwards to politically dominant province of Punjab and to some extent to Sindh, that it actually will pass through Lahore and Islamabad. Why do you think this is happening? Is it because of concerns about Balochistan, or is it provincial rivalry and Chinese trying to promote a particular party or a particular set of political leaders?
It could well be that, because this is what they've done in Sri Lanka. They put all their weight behind the Rajapaksa family and the projects that were dear to the Rajapaksa family. They could be doing this for Nawaz Sharif or Shahbaz Sharif. It's possible. But if an economic corridor is to make sense, it should go through those parts of Pakistan which are economically more vibrant and where industries can come up in that corridor, and where energy supplies, energy projects can then come up, which will then supply energy to those projects. Routing that corridor through areas which cannot really be developed in any reasonable time frame and are subject to other kinds of threats, security, and otherwise doesn't make sense. So if they have shifted it eastwards, I don't know if they have.
But all the
that
energy,
would make sense.
Energy comes from Balochistan. All the gas comes from Balochistan.
No, you were talking about coming through Punjab.
No, if the corridor goes
so far
through
as
Punjab, the gas will
is
still come from Balochistan.
So far as Balochistan is concerned, it is unavoidable geographically, because Gwadar is at the east end of Balochistan. It doesn't make sense to develop a corridor which goes from Gwadar almost till Karachi and then goes up. This is nonsense. So it has to go through Balochistan.
But you avoid most of Balochistan.
This I don't know what the exact delineation is. If they are doing it, then it is a practical approach to the problem.
Okay. All right. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll continue with this interesting discussion. Don't go away. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing China redefining its ties with Pakistan. Mr. Ranade, you wanted to say something about the route of the corridor.
Well, I was just adding to what discussion was going on about the original studies that were done by the Chinese, the feasibility studies for the rail and the road from linking Kashgar to Gwadar. That was straight through Balochistan. And it is now that the Chinese maps have shown a changed route.
Eastward shift.
Eastward shift. Linking Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, etc. and down to Gwadar. Well, earlier it was a straight line running down.
Okay, so the route has been shifted because of considerations we are unaware of what they are. Ranga, some strategic analysts have argued that China is pursuing these continental corridors, one through Pakistan, another through Myanmar, largely because of its concerns about sea lanes of communication, the so-called Malacca dilemma of China. What are these concerns? And can they be addressed by the neighboring countries?
Well, see, today China has become so import dependent. Yeah. In fact, their current statistics show that insofar as energy supplies are concerned, the amount of energy that China is importing is even more than what the Americans are importing. They become the #1 importer. So naturally, in order to sustain the economy and to grow at the rate at which they're presently planning, because if they don't grow, they say at around 7 to 8%, then it affects social stability, which essentially means that it would be difficult for the Communist Party to continue its rule in China. And therefore, it is necessary to have, in order to have that, you have to have trade and so on.
What is the maritime concern? And my question is, can India and China cooperate in the Indian Ocean to address those concerns?
Well, of course, cooperation is always possible. It's a question of what are the aims and objectives and the framework within which we are cooperating. Now, if you look at the maritime Silk Route that has been drawn up, the only point which is supposed to be part of that is Calcutta. Today, Calcutta is the third largest port in India. And if you take all of the tonnage that's handled in Indian ports, it is about the same or a little less than what Shanghai port alone handles. So therefore, you would have to have an enormous upgradation of port facilities, the capacities and so on. If the Chinese are going to be involved in making investments in those and helping India in order to grow its port capacities and its seagoing capacity, etc., then of course it would make a great deal of sense for India and China to work together.
My question was more about security of sea lanes of communication. Do you want to say something on that?
About, India and China cannot cooperate unless China cooperates with us in the north. You can't have a situation where, because they are vulnerable in terms of the sea lanes of communication, we actually cooperate with them to reduce that vulnerability, while at the same time the Chinese keep making claims and outrageous claims on Arunachal Pradesh. So there has to be a real normalization of relations between India and China for us to
I
reach
think
that position.
you've answered that question, but my real question to you was, what are the implications of this China-Pakistan economic corridor if it comes through? Despite all the difficulties, let's assume all the difficulties will be surmounted, and that the corridor will come into being. What does it mean for India strategically?
Two things. One, of course, is that it'll go through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and this is totally contrary to China's own logic, that nothing should be done in terms of projects or development in so-called disputed areas. And China has itself recognized that POK is a disputed area. When they signed the 1963 border agreement, it was subject to the finalization of the status of this territory in negotiation between India and Pakistan.
Okay, that is one.
So therefore, we should object very strongly to what they're doing. Secondly, I don't see this being more than, I won't say marginally, but one should not exaggerate the importance of this corridor in terms of larger China-built connectivities or one belt or whatever else it is. Thirdly, they are getting energy from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and now increasingly from Russia. So far as the Malacca dilemma is concerned, to some extent already that has been addressed. It can be addressed a little more by getting access to the Gulf, but that doesn't radically change the problem of China in terms of its vulnerabilities in the sea because of the fact that it's become a huge trading nation, the largest exporter in the world.
Mr. Ranade, let me ask you something completely which will sound bizarre. Why shouldn't India offer to invest in this corridor?
Well, firstly, it goes through areas that are ours and which are under the occupation
So
of Pakistan.
we should offer to invest there?
So that is the first thing. And the Chinese, in fact, as you probably are aware, don't even visit J&K because they claim that that's disputed territory. So our getting involved in that, I think, is something that we need to really think about, whether it's wise or not. I would suggest that the Chinese first stop their infrastructure activity, which has been going on for quite some years. They're building about 35 projects already.
So basically you're saying no, we should not.
Yes, certainly.
May I quickly on this, if China is willing to create an economic corridor with an economy which is 1/10 India's size, then China must also consider what kind of a corridor it wants to have with India, which is that much larger and therefore could play a much more useful role as an economic partner of China than Pakistan can.
Okay.
Well, in answer to your question which you posed just now, we have our BCI, we have our Mumbai, Delhi economic corridor, we have the Bangalore, Chennai corridor, Chennai, Mumbai corridor. Let's concentrate on those corridors.
They are internal. I'm talking of linking up the region.
These need huge investments.
I agree with you.
Right, so let's focus on that.
But I'm saying that why not have regional connectivity? We talk about SAARC, we talk about SAARC connectivity.
Connectivity is already there. Pre-partition India was all connected. The connectivity is there. Let Pakistan change its policy.
Let it be a single economic zone.
Which can happen, but why do you need this China economic corridor as part of that? First, let Pakistan change its policies.
Basically, this is what would become the test of whether it is truly an economic corridor or a security corridor in the name of an economic corridor.
Now, one last question, all of you, if you can just give me a quick answer. Is it not in India's interest that Pakistan becomes a normal state? That it has a state which has the capacity to deliver development and economic welfare to its people. I mean, Pakistani people deserve economic development as any other country, which has poverty. So that Pakistan no longer is a state which, because of its various problems, is destabilizing the entire neighborhood.
Yeah, but you are assuming that as if India is responsible for this.
I'm not saying this.
No,
if China is helping them become normal, why aren't we welcoming it?
Good, fine. Let them go ahead and do it so long as there is no anti-India angle and they stay away from POK.
Okay.
Apart from that, if they want to do it...
Well, without POK, there is no corridor.
And if they put a naval base in Gwadar, why should we accept that?
Okay. Ranga?
Well, I think, first of all, it is in Pakistan's own interest to determine what kind of a future it wants. If this is the kind of future that you are talking about, prosperity, stability, etc., who can quarrel with that? But what we have to be concerned, and here I agree completely with Ambassador Sibal, that if it is going through territory which are Indian territory under foreign occupation, and the Chinese are well aware of our position on that, and if there is going to be any security implications adverse to India's interests, then I think we have to think very carefully before we say yes or no.
If all this is true, how come we've not heard anything from Government of India on this economic corridor going through POK? It's all right for you gentlemen to say it in TV studios, but from the Ministry of External Affairs, you've not heard anything unless you've heard something.
Well, I'm not aware of them having made a statement yet, but I'm sure they're evaluating it. But I think, if I may just make a point, that what we should not lose sight of is that China has taken a major step towards making Pakistan a dependent client state of China. It is a purely strategic move that they have made, and I think we must keep that in mind, along with China's conference on peripheral diplomacy held in October 2013, where they decided that they're going to have, start changing the power equations in this region. Okay. This is the first step on that.
All right, that's one way of looking at it. But we have run out of time, so we'll end the discussion here. I have to thank my guests, Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, Ambassador Rangachari, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, for participating in this discussion. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching India's World.